Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual roundtable sponsored by the Ohio College Personnel Association. So this webinar is geared towards current and recently graduated. Congratulations, by the way, graduate students. My name is Dave Vale, and I serve as the Assistant Director for First Year Experience and Family Programs at Case Western Reserve University. In addition, I serve as the Membership Chair of the Ohio College Personnel Association as well. And finally, I'm going to be serving as the moderator of this webinar. I want to thank all of you for attending and want to especially thank our illustrious panelists who are giving their time and effort to join us today. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to them and let them introduce themselves right now. So Dr. Deborah Race, do you want to kick things off?
Yes, sorry, had to unmute. But I'm Deborah Race, and formerly Harmoning. I teach at the University of Toledo and coordinate and direct their master's residential program. And I've been at Toledo 10 years. Prior to that, I was at the University of Southern Mississippi. And then prior to that was at Wabash College in Indiana. So I studied mainly student development and interested in the spiritual aspect of that for students. And that's what I do. And I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Dr. Mark Kretovics?
All right, Mark Kretovics. I'm at Kent State University. I'm wrapping up I guess I'm going into my 19th year here at Kent State. Prior to that, I was an administrator for about 20 years at a variety of different institutions, liberal arts, as well as large comprehensives. I also had the opportunity to serve as the interim dean here at Kent State for a couple of years in the College of Education, Health, and Human Services. My areas of work are primarily focused on the business side of higher education, so business aspects as well as power and politics issues within the institutions.
Great. Dr. Ken Schneck?
You lost me a little bit at illustrious, but I'll keep going on that one. Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Schneck. I'm heading into my 8th year as a professor of education and director of the Leadership in Higher Education program at Baldwin Wallace University, right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. Prior to being here, I was a dean of students for 10 years at small liberal arts colleges in the Northeast. And then decided to check out what the Midwest had to offer. My specialty is racial justice on college campuses. So I wish we were in class right this second, but we are, because we're always in class.
Awesome. Dr. Christina Lunsford?
Hi, sorry to join you so late. I just got my technology sorted out. My name is Christina Lunsford. I'm an associate professor and interim department chair at Bowling Green State University in the Department of Higher Education and Student Affairs. I missed what we're supposed to be doing, but I'm gathering some introduction of our background. This is my 21st year in higher education. I just finished my 9th year at Bowling Green State University. I'm originally from California, and I worked at Cal State Long Beach, Cal State Fullerton, Concordia University in Irvine, and University of the Western Cape in South Africa. And some of my research interests are on equity and diversity in higher education and educational access, socialization to individuals into institutions of higher education, and short-term study abroad programs and learning. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, and Dr. Michele Welkener.
Okay, unmuted myself. Hi, I'm Michele Welkener. I am an associate professor and coordinator of the Higher Ed and Student Affairs program. We just changed our name. It was Higher Ed and CSP, but now it's Higher Ed and Student Affairs programs. We're now HESA at University of Dayton, and I've been here for about 13 years. And before that, I was coordinator of the Student Personnel Assistance Program at The Ohio State University, and had the good fortune to work there for a few years. Before that, I was in administrative roles. I was coordinator of learning communities at Miami, and before that, I was in faculty development for a little while at Indiana State University. So my research is in creativity, learning, and student development, and yeah, I'm thrilled to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, I know I'm happy all you can make it here. So, so I have a few initial questions for our panel to kick off the discussion. But I encourage you all to join in the conversation as well. For the attendees, if you click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom call, you'll be able to type any questions you have for the panelists as we go through the hour. I'll be monitoring this throughout the webinar, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can before 1 p.m. We will get to some questions regarding the current events that have taken place over the last 10 days. But I'd like to first start by focusing on the COVID-19 pandemic and the changes that have taken place in higher education institutions across the country this past spring semester, as well as moving forward. So to kick things off, I'll direct this to the entire panel, but maybe we'll start with Dr. Brace. How do you see the COVID-19 pandemic affecting this upcoming academic year? And what do you see as the biggest challenges facing your institution because of it?
Well, I think, initially, I'm not muted, correct? You can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, right now, we've been in a strange situation since March, so we've adapted at the, the university level and program level. And I think I think the main change I see is just trying to stay flexible and respond to changing situations, which is teaching me to do that and try to help my students do the same thing, not get so set on long-term, but just deal with the day-to-day. And so I see that, and I see that coming for the fall, although we've been told in both, in written form that we are returning in the fall with a phased reopening. So I think we're all just adapting to that idea that we'll be wearing face masks, that we may have limited office hours. I don't know what classrooms are going to look like. I'm expecting myself to be part hybrid, so I'll probably be on campus a little bit less. I'm just really, myself and the faculty I work with are really trying to take it day by day, week by week. And I see that at the university level. And also preparing our students to do that. And I think, for the University of Toledo, I don't know how all of you are faring, but we were in a financial sort of free fall before COVID with some, I won't go into the details, but some issues with medical college and just many things that I think were taking us down, maybe not a great financial path, but we are now really facing an uncertain and unknown future. And I have had emails about my own furlough, and I have been concerned about my own loss of job. So we're in a precarious position, and we'll be entering that into the fall. And I don't know what the academic year will look like. Right now, it looks like we're facing close to a $40 million shortfall next year. And this year, we've been scaling back for years. This is not an unknown thing. I knew it was coming. I just didn't know that it was going to come like this and in this form. We have no travel money. We have no money, period. So that's the environment I'm operating in. And I still have a job. I'm grateful. And I'm trying to help my students see that too, that we're still operating, and I'm looking for the good. So that's what I'm facing. I hope that answered your question. If you need more, then let me know.
No, that's great. Dr. Mark Kretovics?
For me, I look at it as a couple of factors. I think, as Dr. Brace just mentioned, some of the financial pieces, the uncertainty of resources right now, and institutions that were in financial difficulty, those problems are going to be exacerbated by what we're dealing with right now. So you're going to see some of the institutions, especially some of the smaller colleges, are going to really struggle with the reopening pieces. But the uncertain resources are difficult. I think we all need to be ready for that, whether it's furloughs, layoffs, whatever you want to call it. We've seen what happened at OU. I think BG is experiencing some difficulties. Kent State, we haven't laid anybody off yet, but we had voluntary separation plan, which we're hearing different numbers about how many people are going to take that. But a lot of people are taking it because of the fear. If I didn't take the separation, then I'm going to get laid off. So that's got a lot of people on edge right now. As we get our financial houses in order, I think what we're seeing, COVID-19 has really highlighted and I hate to be maybe I'm on my stump now, but the fiscal irresponsibility of the last several decades is now just being realized right now. People are seeing, gosh, we shouldn't have spent all that money on those frills that we didn't really need to be spending it on. And, my area in business, I've been harping on this for years, but it's really come to the fore. Another issue we've got to really work on, and this hits everybody, and David, you can probably talk a little bit to this too, is the idea of accurate data. How many students are really going to come back to our campuses? How many students are going to not come back if we go online? How many students are going to avoid us if we go face-to-face? These numbers, we're probably not going to know that until August, till it really hits. So the planning is just unbelievable right now. It's literally day to day. We can't think 3 months ahead, let alone 3 days ahead at this point in time. So everybody's just got to really be understanding that this is a very, very much of an evolving event. It's not a fixed time frame.
Dr. Lunsford? Oh, you're muted.
I swear I've been pretty good the last 2.5 months of technology, today excluded. I echo some of what has already been said, but I'll add some other things. And I think it is just a waiting period. There's a lot of unknown right now, and people want answers. Our students want answers. Our faculty want answers. And for me as a department chair, I simply don't know, because we're waiting for a task force that's meeting that won't have answers for a couple weeks, if then. So I think that adds to some of the frustration that we just need to know some definitive answers so we know how to plan moving forward. And we don't get to know all the answers right now. Some of the other things that we're looking at is if we don't have some face-to-face instruction in the fall, we're going to be in more financial crises because we need those student fees to operate. So I think enrollment, yes, we need to see what our enrollment numbers will be, but we need to, a lot of universities depend on the student fees as well. So I think next year we're going to see a lot more budget cuts, because I think the fall enrollment will dictate what that looks like. And we have about 5 more months to make some decisions about the next round of cuts. I think that we're going to get into some HR policy stuff about who can come to campus, who has to come to campus, who can leave and why are they eligible to work remote and can stay working from remote. So I think that's going to come up. We're going to get into some situations like that. Our university is trying to get at least 1/3 of our courses fully online, some hybrid, some face-to-face. We're looking about accessing personal protective equipment, outfitting all of our spaces within our college and university. We're rethinking where we can teach our courses and what space looks like. And then as far as the curriculum, if we're not going to be fully face-to-face as we want to be, and in grad school, we mostly have seminar and discussion type courses. So we have to rethink how we're teaching what we're teaching, and also the what. If we don't have time to get through all the course content and our key signature curricula that we usually do, where are we going to fit it in throughout the rest of our programs to make sure we're hitting our core competencies? So I think those are some things I'd add to what's been already said, but I think next year we're going to see a lot more cuts, and I know that adds to the stress of functioning. So like my colleagues have said, we have to be patient, and everyone needs to know that we're doing the best we can.
Great. Dr. Schneck?
Yes, to all of that, right? The financial stressors and the logistical stressors, I keep saying that if I did have $1 for every time I hear the word nimble or say the word nimble, I could pay off probably both mine and everyone else's student debt. But I think that really is going to be the embodiment that's important. In addition to what my colleagues have said, I think my 2 hopes that I'm looking forward to are increased collaboration with other schools. I think this is really the time where I want to know even more about what my colleagues are doing in other programs and let them know what we're doing, so that we can share different ideas and borrow and steal and copy and all the things that we do together to support when there's limited resources. And then, my other hope too, and I know, David, you had mentioned that we'd be talking about this as well, but that we really do approach this in an interdisciplinary way, in an intersectional way, because we know that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected our Black colleagues and our Black students. And so the opportunity to talk about racial justice is just as present in talking about coronavirus as it is when we'll talk about everything else that's happening. And so I'm really hoping that these conversations start to come together more across the university and certainly across society, because it'll be a really important opportunity for all of our campus communities coming up.
And then Dr. Welkener.
Yeah, this is the downside of being the end of the alphabet. Everything that's been said, I agree. That, you know, uncertainty of enrollment, and then it's seeing who actually shows up, you know, in person, if we have in person, the decreasing budgets and the challenges with, it's not just working, you know, with little, it's sometimes working without in certain situations, and trying to figure out how to, you know, keep students and faculty safe and healthy, which should be obviously a first priority given the virus. But I guess the one thing that people haven't really touched on so far that I could add is thinking about, and this might be one of the most challenging aspects of our work, is the cultural aspect in terms of the expectations. So everybody comes into university life expecting it to be a certain experience, and that's going to have to change. You know, you hear institutions talking about if we have face-to-face, that it'll be, you know, with directional, you know, paths in the hallways so that you keep in your lane, and, you know, everyone wearing, you know, protective gear of some kind, or 6 feet apart, or all these things that will require us to operate differently. And so when you think of the traditional college experience being everybody, you know, interacting in the hallways, students in the President's Hall staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning and sitting out in the, you know, and talking to one another, and all these communal things, all these aspects of community that we know to be the college experience, even if we have face-to-face in the fall, will not look the same. And so how do we adjust everybody's, including faculty and staff's, expectations about what that can look like in order to keep people safe? And that might be the harder thing for us to fix. You know, and in many ways, we can make adjustments to policies and practices, but how do we shift the culture to thinking differently about what we can do with the experiences that we and the learning that we can create? So that's what I find fascinating right now.
Right. So I'm gonna throw this out to everyone, and so whoever wants to answer, feel free to jump in. So we did get a question on the thing, but it also goes with the next question I had for you, which so the question that we received was, what's the viability of a career in this field given these concerns that you all are expressing? And they just said that it's kind of they're feeling kind of hopeless right now. So I was going to say, what advice would you give to recent graduates from your programs who are currently going through the job search process, knowing that there's universities who are on hiring freezes and all the other issues that you all kind of just mentioned?
Okay, if it's okay, I'll jump in. And 2 things: patience and flexibility. Be patient. The hiring freezes aren't going to last forever. You know, we're going to come back. It's just going to be a different approach to coming back. It may not be until January before things get settled. It may be you may have to look at waiting perhaps another year. The other piece here is flexible in the types of positions you're looking for and the modality in which you may start. You may be starting your orientation position online. So think about those issues. So I encourage patience and flexibility.
I agree. And I would add, oh, go ahead.
Okay. So I think that some people are looking about going back to grad school. I think I've had students enroll in like a 1-year graduate program, or those who've had more experience before their master's go into a PhD program. I think Mark's right, being flexible about what type of position and where it's located. But the reality is that some people are location bound. So yeah, we do know the hiring freezes or chills won't last forever, and there are still schools hiring. we're trying to connect with our alumni network to say, hey, hire us. We have good students, and I think they know they're well prepared. So connecting to networks. I think Akuho I and TPE are good resources for how to job search in this market and also what's available. And there's a lot of using the resource available would be really helpful. But it isn't business as normal, and expectations, as you were talking about, Michele, they have to change as well. And this is another example where students want answers where we just don't have them, because it truly is an unprecedented time. But we also have been in recessions and in financial dyers before. So trying to figure out what that looks like. And for us, making sure their basic needs are settled and taken care of to make sure they have what they need while they're continuing the job search process.
Yeah, piggybacking on what Christina just said, our alumni, and this feeds into another question about internships, our alumni network has been huge. Because of our alumni, I sent out one message to, I think it was social media, to our alums, and next thing I knew, we had about a dozen internships, because a lot of our students said, hey, everybody's backed out on us. And our alumni stepped up and said, we'll come up with stuff for them to do. We'll use them. We know you can get, great help. And same with the job search. If there are positions available, students can reach out to their alumni networks, and that can be a huge benefit. In terms of some of our recent alums, thinking differently about their current skill set and where they could be used until they can get back to a higher ed position, perhaps, is different types of learning organizations. So certainly there are, nonprofits, there are plenty of places that need help that, and even in the business industry, where, our students, given their focus on learning, can contribute. So various types of learning organizations can be good sites for our students to kind of continue their practice, and continue to develop their skills until a year or two, when they can come back to higher education if that's their first choice. So thinking about different types of learning sites, and really when you start thinking about jobs that way, it opens up a whole new set of possibilities.
Yeah, I would add, I do say this every year anyway, but I think it's more salient right now is to really drill past the title of the job. I think a lot of our students have alerts set up on the various, on Chronicle, on Inside Higher Ed, that's very, very much based on job title or functional area. And what they're missing are the job responsibilities. And so I would always encourage students to drill down to the responsibilities, but sometimes you're not even seeing that, because the way that you have your alert set up, the way that you have your searches set up is right this second, it's just way too myopic. And so we had a position that was posted here at BW last week that normally our graduates would have skipped right over because of the title. And then when you actually look at the description, it's an academic advising job. That's what the job is, but it wouldn't have come up on any alerts that students would have set up. So it's really important to skip past the title and start looking at, well, what are these jobs? What do these jobs consist of? Because there are a lot more opportunities there than you might think.
I'll add to that too.
This is at Kent.
Oh, sorry.
Same as at BW. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say briefly that we have a voluntary separation program as well, and it resulted in a huge number of, a big number of faculty and staff, but mostly staff that are leaving. And we know that not every single one of those positions is going to be filled, but there are a number of openings that are going to be coming up at a lot of different universities because they are doing some restructuring. So it hurts my heart to see that word hopeless, and I totally see it and I validate it and I understand it. But there are other pieces in the wings that really might be helpful coming up.
What I was going to add to that is that, one thing I'm trying to think of for myself, but also for my students, is that, again, this environment requires you to be flexible and to think flexibly about what your skill sets are and how they're transferable to different jobs, even outside of higher ed, because some of our students may start out in another field and come back, or they may start in higher ed and leave after 5 years. And so I personally think that we, or myself, do an injustice to my students when I help them only think in a tunnel vision that I'm in higher ed and this is what I do. Well, yeah, you got trained in that, but think about how your skills transfer to all sorts of fields, because you don't know what 5 years is going to be like. You don't know what 10 years is going to be like. And for myself, I think, well, what am I capable of doing? If I lose my job in higher ed, I'm place bound. And so I'm trying to help my students see that. Like when you sit down and think, well, here's what I know how to do. Well, that leaves you with a wide array of possibilities, which is kind of exciting, because rather than seeing it limited or hopeless, you see, well, here's all these great opportunities I can think about beyond higher ed if I'm willing to do that. So that's what I'm trying to urge my students to do now, and to take, like, I think, Mark, you said it, or maybe it was Michele, but that a lot of my students had to go home for the summer. And so I said, you know what, why don't you look locally to see what kind of things you can volunteer for to keep your foot in the door and to get more experience, so that when jobs do come up, people will look at what you did with your time. And I think it will help them be very hireable.
So a follow-up question on that flexibility. What do you see as some of the functional areas in student affairs that maybe are most viable right now? And then there was a question about just your study abroad offices and how to engage with those students. So if you can, if anyone wants to touch on those two things.
Sure, I'll jump in if nobody else. I think a couple things. Res services, res life. If we're going to be bringing people back to campus, we need staff. It doesn't matter if you're going to have 150 or 300 students in your building. If you go doubles or singles, you still need hall directors to run these facilities. So there'll be, I think, a few of those. Ken brought up the point about academic advising at BW. I think for a lot of our institutions, we do rely a lot on advising for positions. I think career services is another one. Career services is going to be in demand. We're going to need to have folks that can also look at career services from a remote aspect. I think those three come to mind as some of the ones that are going to be hard to replace. It's hard to do. You can't do res life remotely. So things of that nature are going to be, I think, very viable in the future.
And I'd also put out there that a lot of the jobs, they might be open for entry-level positions because they're cheaper to hire, right? They're less expensive. So as we see turnover and more senior staff members, once we revitalize and restructure and figure out what this new normal or the new formation and configuration of our spaces might be, there will be new jobs opening. So I think that for earlier career people, you'll have a good option to seek out some of those jobs in those positions. But I think I'd agree with Mark that the functional areas, and maybe new ones might be happening with distance learning and education. So this is where your transferable skills will be put to use. So make sure you use them. And then if you don't know how to do that, contact your faculty or some other career services to help you figure out how to make sure and how you see your current skill development transfer into other functional areas.
I think one of the areas that we'll see a pretty reasonable change in is marketing. Schools have to become more adept at marketing on the fly and marketing in ways that we maybe hadn't envisioned. And I'm not a marketer, I don't know. I'm just watching what's unfolding in my own university. And I also think, an area that is just going to keep growing as it has been are anything that's tech related to the university. I mean, our poor tech people have been working overtime, and I would envision our university hiring more people to work with Blackboard, more people to problem solve. And so if students have an interest, any kind of interest in that field, or even curriculum design, I think they're going to see a change in that. I think, schools, especially UT, I think we're realizing, gee, we need to get a little bit better at at the whole online and curriculum design for that environment.
Study abroad is rough right now. You know, I don't think that there's a lot of argument about that. There are trips being canceled, and we were actually saying before we were on the call, all of us that were on the call before are supposed to be abroad. And so it's hard, but we're also seeing just a lot of alternative models that schools are looking at. And so I think that really, I'm going to tie this into the transferable skills piece of really looking at, again, how can we use technology to provide an immersive experience, which is just as true in study abroad as it is in service learning, as it is on the academic side. And so what does it look like to go abroad without going abroad is not an academic ideological question. It's an actual question that we all are going to have to answer. And I think that new views on that are going to be really critical to making sure that that still happens.
Yeah, my research is on creativity in higher education, so I feel like I've got my work cut out for me right now. But the beauty of a challenge or a problem, like we're in right now with so many things, there's so much uncertainty, there's so much, you know, old ways aren't going to work anymore for most of the situations that we're in. It's going to demand us to kind of think differently about the work that we're doing. And I think, you know, in many ways, like the students had said, it feels hopeless. But if you turn that equation around, there's actually a lot of promise in thinking about all of our work in completely new ways. So there's an opportunity for us to, you know, do good with this situation, which is to say, what, you know, just like the study abroad example. So, you know, 30 years ago, if study abroad was canceled, it would have been, well, that's it, you know. But think about all the things we can do through technology now. You know, what prevents us from, you know, in the future, during study abroad, having somebody with a GoPro kind of going through the experience and then enabling students behind them to have that, you know, if financial or other situations prevent them from doing so. I mean, there's just so many ways to think differently about what we're doing. And I think there's a lot of hope with that. There's a lot of promise with that. And I think there's going to be many ways we can continue on with our work. It's just going to look different. And that's what's so frustrating and really challenging right now is you know, being open and willing to think about things in completely new ways, when often that hasn't been the case in higher education. You know, we often joke about higher ed moving at a glacial pace, and it's so this is kind of putting us in a whole new position to consider what we do, each thing we do. Can we do this differently? Whatever it is, no matter how small of a task, is this still the best way to do this? And so in many ways, I look at the work we've been doing over, you know, the course of, you know, our careers anyway, those of us on the panel, and I think, wow, we're going to come up with some better, more efficient, more learning-centered, perhaps, ways to do things than we have in the past because we've been put in this position. So while it feels hopeless, at the same time, I feel like it's hopeful.
So some of you have touched on this already, but what transferable skills do you think are most vital to finding a job, if it's in higher ed or maybe even if it's outside of higher ed?
Yeah, I would have said this before as well, but even more so now, your writing and your oratory skills are hugely important. The method by which we're interacting is substantively different than it was before. And so the importance of a clearly articulated email or one-page summary of what we're looking to do, I would say is even more important, as is because we're all, you know, it's our meetings are bigger because there's more people on the Zoom. So it's different than just gathering in the same room. And so because of that, being able to express yourself clearly and succinctly and quickly is critically important. And there's still oratory groups and Toastmaster groups and so many different places that are helping people on their speaking skills that are running online. And I highly encourage people to interact with some of those, because that clarity of presentation is different than it was, but no less important. In fact, in some ways more so.
I'd add one of the most obvious is probably your technology competencies. I think that's really important. Working with people across difference, multicultural competence, and equity, and education around justice. I think that's really important because of this global life, right? Where I'm from California, so the diversity looks a little different than it is where I'm at in Northwest Ohio. But understanding who's in your area, your region, and your space is really important across different dimensions of identity and background. I'd also say advising or supervising, working with people day to day. And I think that we take that for granted most often, and I don't think everyone's that good at it. So I think those are some things that are transferable. And even like marketing, understanding how to learn your environment and your tool or your product or whatever you're working with, and being able to effectively mark that across groups and different mediums. I think those are some really strong transferable skills. But I think that reading and writing and communication would be at my top, just like Ken.
Oh, Deborah, you're muted right now.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Sure.
I think, because I've had to think about this a lot, and our students, they take some research as a master's student, but not in depth, not like a doc student. But I think I would urge students to read more and learn more about research, and to think how they can teach themselves to also think more analytically. That I think analytic skills are going to be they are important, but are going to be even more important as we deal with changing environments. And so I would urge students to really do some of their own work on learning about research, and just working on their own analytical and thinking skills. And I think, this may not seem like it applies, but I always tell students, and I believe it, otherwise I don't think I'd say it, but you get a degree and you have that piece of paper that shows you have this background in higher ed, but they're not hiring the degree, they're hiring the person. Whatever you can do to improve your own personal character, your own attitude about your work, the way you interact with people online, in face-to-face, is critical. You can have the skill set and you can be brilliant, but if you're not a decent human, you're not going to get very far. And so work on your character, work on your attitude about your work. And even though the environment might change, you still have to be on time. You still have to play nice. You still have to be encouraging to other people. Your words matter. So I think I would push that almost more than anything, because we're in a trying time. People really need uplifting, and students can be a light for that. So I would probably encourage that a great deal.
Michele, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was reflecting on some of the comments that Christina was saying, and that really resonated with me in terms of the skills our students have with social justice issues. And right now, obviously, there's a huge need for that, given what's going on in the world right now, in the United States especially. So figuring out how our students can contribute to some of the healing, especially the racial healing that isn't needed right now in our country. I could see that applying to so many places. And they can be agents of change and help and support in those areas because of what they've learned and developed in our programs. And just helping people learn. So even in businesses, there's training and there's work that needs to be done to help people figure out what do we need to know about learning to do this more effectively. And so I think those are so many, and of course all the basics that were mentioned about writing and communication, those are essential. But added to that, all these special things about how to develop people that our students are really primed to contribute to the world. There's a lot of possibility there.
Christina?
I just had one more thing to add. I think we wouldn't underestimate how to put on a good program or organize an event. And I think that that's a really good transferable skills, from setting up to budget management, all those details that go into programming. As much as some people don't like doing that, I think that's a great skill that transfers across any area. But I've been seeing some of the Q&A that comes in through the placement exchange. It's owned by Kuho I now, but they do a lot of career skill development, career development, counseling almost, with areas beyond residence life and housing. So I think that might address some of the questions that are coming through. It's an excellent resources for student affairs, and they did the placement exchange online, and so the director, Kirsten Fox, knows the market really well. So I would encourage those of you who have all these questions, I would use the resources available. I think that'd be a good resource beyond this webinar. So I just want to make sure we do that in case we run out of time.
Just toss in one thing. I agree with everything that's been said, obviously communication through technology and such. One thing though is understand how to assess your abilities. Assessment is I think a critical skill. I have on my screensaver, it just says justify your existence. Every day you need to be able to justify why we should keep you employed. Why does your job need to exist? Today, more than ever, we have to be able to defend ourselves and our positions. So think about how do you assess that, and then how do you communicate that?
Great. Another question that came in was, will the pandemic help to normalize work from home, since that's basically what everyone is doing right now? Will this help normalize work from home in higher education?
It might, in some areas. I think my concern, and it wasn't until Debra spoke about it, and now I'm obsessed with it, is really about the attitudinal piece. I've been thinking so much over the past year about disposition and how we present ourselves. And I think, yes, you are in the space that is not a classroom and is not an office and is more, for many of us, what we consider to be home. But there are still disposition elements that need to translate, and that's both in your professional life, that's in your interviewing life, and conveying, as Mark just said, why should we hire you? And I certainly, I will speak for me, and say I've been guilty of this on maybe a couple calls of being a little bit more lax than I should be about how I am presenting. Not just like I'm not showing up in my pajamas, but really just in terms of the focus. And multitasking, and oh, look, my cat just ran that, right? So how are we carving out a space, even if it is work from home, that still conveys the professionalism and the commitment? I'm less worried about professionalism, though it's a concern, and more worried about displaying the commitment to this work in the same way that we would if we were together in person. And I think that I need to challenge myself on that and think critically about that, but I think we all do, because the environment has shifted. That's, again, it was a concern of mine, and then Debra just ramped it up astronomically.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I think that's a good question, whoever asked that about the normalization, because up until this time, I'm a commuter. I live in Indiana, but I work in Toledo, and I would drive in 3 days a week and do 3 full days, morning till late at night, drive back home or spend the night. And that was just my mindset. And this has taught me that actually, in some cases, I'm more effective at home. Like for my doc students, I give them much more one-on-one time, much more just time spent going over dissertation. And so I've had to rethink what's good about being at home. And I think in a way, it's also forcing other institutions to see that you can be highly productive in almost any environment, given the support that you might need, whether it's technical or I don't know what that looks like, but I don't know if it's going to normalize it. I do know that it's probably going to change the perspective of work from home for a lot of people. Like, oh yeah, I actually can be highly productive, efficient, helpful, useful. I think a lot of people are going to see that. I personally don't like it. I miss campus. I miss my office. I miss seeing students all the time. But this is just our reality right now, and we can still function very well in it, I think. I hope it's not the new normal, but.
And I think those of us who thought we couldn't use the technology, we don't really have a choice now. So I think that it's forced people that are always afraid to use the technology available to start dabbling in that. And now when we're planning for the fall semester, some of our faculty are using the summer to retool and rethink how they might teach and what they are going to be teaching. So I think that in the past we said, oh, this class can never be taught online. We don't have a choice. So it's forcing us to rethink things. In our college leadership meeting, actually yesterday, our conversation centered on maybe not this is being normalized, but we don't think we're ever going to get back to where we were. I think that, and who knows what's going to happen, but I think that I think more things will be online. Meeting structures may change with how much we teach, how often we teach. Sorry. And so I think that might bring just a second. Just say yes or no. Okay, I'll let someone else go right now. But I don't know if it's going to be normalized, but I don't think it'll become the new norm that everything will be switched as it is right now.
I truly believe that she is a plant and this was a setup as a case study.
Perfect timing.
That was perfect.
Well, it gets me thinking too about Strange and Banning and other people who have studied environments, notion of the third space, because in some ways we don't have that, right? And college campuses, we work on those third spaces to create places where you're not at work, you're not at home. It's a safe place to kind of engage in other things. And so it makes me wonder, maybe we need to be intentional about creating some of those on our campuses in this kind of new normal, or while this is the case. So again, it's just different, but how can we think about the conditions under which, we're living right now and still, provide what people's, needs call for. So yeah, that was perfect timing.
So I did want to, because we have less than 10 minutes here for our time frame, and I did want to touch on just the current events that have taken place, including the deaths of African Americans, as well as the nationwide protests against state violence that have happened in the past 10 days. So once again, a question to all of you. So what do you see as the role of institutions of higher education, as well as higher education professionals ourselves surrounding these topics, and how do we support our students, especially our students of color, in this time?
Yeah, I'm headed into a meeting in 7 minutes. I wish I hadn't just started talking because I would want to keep it focused. I will just say that I think platitudes are a great thing, and I've been doing a lot of work over the past week looking at different presidents' statements. And so there's, in some ways, 3 different categories as I see it. You have college presidents who are or schools that are not making any statements whatsoever, which is not a small number. You have colleges that are issuing statements, but they're really statements and the statements of community and articulation of values. And then you do have a number of schools, but a small number, that are articulating very specific action plans. And so my focus is certainly on the specific action plans. I think it's important to articulate a statement of values, and higher ed is this wonderful microcosm where we can look at the ways that we interact and the ways that we communicate. But it's also a place where I define support as really explicit role modeling of what it looks like to interact in substantive ways. And so how do we, in particular, not just higher ed, but we specifically, all of us on this call and those that are doing this work with students, faculty, and staff, can point to action items where we provided a space for the needle to move forward in some way. And town halls are great, but then what happened, right? So, you know, we had a speaker, that was great, but then what happened? So really looking at these structural pieces, and again, I'll dial it back to what I said at the start. I think this is, again, where it's critically important that we be speaking to our colleagues and seeing what other schools are doing.
I'd like to chime in, and I'm a firm believer that the road to any kind of social justice is going to be through education. I think it actually starts in our K-12 system and maybe even preschool, but we have to look at who trains our teachers. That's us. Who trains these people? Who designs the curriculum for K-12? That's people in higher education. We have to really focus on that. We have to deliver that in our classrooms. We have to practice it. As Ken said, we have to be the role models. We can't just sit on the sidelines and do nothing. And I think for higher education, we've got to take that leadership role and drive it down into the rest of the educational system. Education's about acculturization. We inculcate our values onto others through our educational processes. These are the values that have got to be inculcated, and we have to really, I think, take that leadership role.
Yeah, I agree. I was thumbing through my phone because our dean just sent out a statement from the president and CEO of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. And it's their statement on the killing of George Floyd and systemic racism. And they talk about how education preparation matters. And I agree that we have to start in the pre-K through 12 area, and that education is a pipeline. And also, I don't think we take seriously the role of higher education in this pipeline, because we're training the teachers and the counselors and the administrators, principals, associate principals. And I think that we need to step it up in a way to help hold people accountable that education happens in our classroom, but also play our role in helping to develop our partners in education. So and then also we need to know what people are getting before they come to us, because we get them in all different levels of preparation. But I've been doing diversity and equity work for 21 years, from consulting stuff, and then I was our assistant to the president for diversity and inclusion for a couple of years at BGSU. But I've seen a lot of need, and I think that even if we have good intentioned people, they don't have the skills or the confidence to do the right work. So we have to figure out how to make it part of our reward structure and make sure people have time to do the work, and make sure it's not always the same people doing that work. And the biggest thing is holding people accountable that happens. So finding ways to call people out and naming things specifically. I don't think we do a good enough job. I had to learn it was hard when I moved to Ohio from California, because the physical diversity was different. And I, as a Black woman, didn't have the support that I needed to do the work, and it's absolutely exhausting. But I think that we have a long way to go. We have people willing to do it, but we have to give them the time and make sure it counts in our reward structure, and then also make sure that they're prepared to do the work so they can build their confidence. We have a long way to go, and it's not new. It's just been exacerbated by and uncovered, but people are just fed up. So this is the reaction that we're seeing, and I think rightfully so.
I think something we probably take for granted in higher education is that, you know, we're policy creators, and we have the influence and privilege of creating structures and all those things. And I think certainly we need to constantly be mindful of those, and that they're structures that are going to be inclusive rather than exclusive, and, you know, interrogate everything that we do, again, for why are we doing it this way, who are we excluding, at what cost, and all those things. But I never want to forget the power of just caring about our students. I feel like in some ways, I've been more effective as an educator just showing how much I care about students than I have with any policy work or anything else I've done. And so, and by that I mean too, helping dispositionally, going back to Ken's comment, disposition is one of the toughest things we have to work on as educators. That's not something we can just change. That takes time, it takes investment in people. And so figuring out how can we reach the white students who don't may resist some of the work that we try to do. And I think I've been most successful related to that with just caring and showing that we care, and that's when sometimes the change comes about. Challenging, but caring. And reaching out, of course, to our students of color right now, making sure they feel heard and that they feel loved. I'm fortunate in that I work for a university where community is a large part of our mission. As a mission-based institution, University of Dayton is Catholic and Marianist, and so we basically say this is what we believe in, and we believe in community, and that means everybody's at the table. And when we fail on that, we can call people out on it and say, hey, this isn't working. What are we going to do about it? Again, that care and concern is literally built into the structure, which is kind of helpful that way. But
so Deborah, before you go,
Yeah.
Ken's got to take off. So thank you so much, Ken. Appreciate you being here. Deborah, if you want to go, and then I'll kind of close things out.
Yeah, this is a difficult topic, and I'm looking at our world, and I think how these things have commingled. COVID, and now a lot of the racial issues. My own town is suffering. People are suffering, and I ask myself, well, is protesting the way to deal with this? And my response has always been, if you don't teach people about their own heart to begin with, the place that they're coming from, and reflect on that, you can't solve the greater world's problems, because you can't change other people. You can try to change yourself and change the environment you work on. And so I think Michele said it well, in that we can, personally, I'm speaking for myself, reach out to people we know might be hurting, lend an ear. And I don't know, it's a tough issue. And I think that the way to think about it is, from my perspective, it starts with the person and the heart. And the only way to deal with that is to teach that heart. And that's how I know to go forward. That's the only way I know.
Great. So as it's past 1 p.m., I want to be cognizant of the time. So we will have to conclude this webinar. But before we do, OCPA has a few upcoming events as well. I put them in the chat. I think everyone hopefully can see that and see the link. But the two events are an OCPA People of Color Affinity Space that's happening on Friday, June 19th from 3 to 5 p.m. So there's a link either in the chat right now or on the OCPA website. In addition, on Wednesday, June 24th, we have a Showing Up for Our Colleagues and Students, a call to action for white higher ed professionals. So you can take a look at what those two sessions are going to be about by going on OCPA's website or clicking those links that I have in the chat. That being said, thank you once again for attending this webinar. Thank you to our incredible panelists for all of your insight, for sharing your knowledge, for answering some of the questions that we maybe couldn't get to live. Appreciate you answering some of those. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and just take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks loads. Thanks, Heather. Take care.